Okay, hi, welcome to the experience. Harmonics, what's the deal? What are they? How do you notate them? Who am I? There are two kinds of harmonics on string instruments, natural and artificial. I'm going to talk about what they are, demonstrate some sounds, and then kind of cover how to notate them properly. Okay, so natural harmonics are pitches that are created when the player touches lightly on the string with their left hand instead of depressing the string all the way. These pitches have a distinct timbre from normal string playing, and their unique sound can be taken great advantage of in orchestration. Natural harmonics don't work just anywhere though. There's specific locations along the length of the string that the finger has to be placed upon for them to work. There are 5 pitches that I'm going to cover, and they range from commonly used and easily produced as harmonics on any given string to less common and more difficult to produce, but not impossible. You can get higher pitches than what I'm going to talk about, especially with larger instruments like the cello and bass, because their strings are longer, but I'm just trying to cover the basics here. Okay, so this is a little chart that I put together kind of showing where these pitches exist and what's happening in order to produce them. This chart specifically is using the G string harmonics on the violin and viola, but for other strings you would just transpose accordingly and all the harmonics will match the transposition, right? But anyway, what this chart is showing is the fundamental pitch, which is the pitch of the open string that's being played on, then the diamond note head, which is where the finger will lightly be placed, and then the solid note head in the top staff is showing what the sounding pitch that results will be. I've also included interval labels above the solid note heads, which is, in my opinion, a more helpful way to think about where the finger is being placed. And as you can see, beyond the first note, there are multiple diamond note heads and interval labels for each harmonic. And this is because either of those placements will work in order to produce the top pitch. So for the third note, I could lightly place my finger a perfect fourth or a perfect 15th above the open string, and the pitch would be the same. I've also indicated that the higher the harmonic, the more inconsistent it is in its production, even when using the lower intervals like the minor third. In my own music, I rarely go higher than the third harmonic produced by the perfect fourth or the 15th, and when I have, I've only ever used the fourth harmonic a handful of times, always using the major third to produce that one. And I would suggest staying in the arena of what I've marked as very easy. Alright, so for the first one, I'm just lightly placing my finger, as indicated by that chart, an octave above the fundamental, right? So here's the open string, and then here's an octave above. And as you can see, it's very different from... This is more like ghostly and icy kind of hollow sound. Right, so that's it on the C string, and then on the G string, D, A. That's the first one. Okay, so then the second one, which is produced with a perfect 5th or 12th above the fundamental, and I'll do both of those fingerings. So here's the 5th, and then the 12th, and then on the other strings. Then the third note, which you can get with a 4th or a perfect 15th, and that's 2 octaves. So here's the 4th, and then the 15th. So notice how high I have to go to produce that. In a lot of contexts, it's much easier to just do that, right? So yeah, that's the C string, then the G string. And it's also harder to find, as you can see. Yeah. And this is where it starts to become more inconsistent. So for this 4th note, which produces that note a major 17th above the open string, so in the context of that chart, that B, 2 octaves and a third above the open G, it's becoming more difficult to produce that pitch consistently. Okay, so starting with the major third, and I'm going to do the major third on all the strings first, actually. Right? Okay, and then the 6th on each of the strings. Okay, and then the 10th, just like... And actually, as I'm doing that, I'm finding that simpler to do and easier than doing the major sixth. And then the 17th, which is the actual pitch, so... I can kind of do a little, like a harmonic trill. Oh, that's cool. So yeah, you can see that it's getting a bit hairier to do consistently. So I'd recommend doing this if you really want to do these pitches. And we'll talk about artificial harmonics in a second and how that can kind of alleviate some of these difficulties. But the ones that are marked as becoming more difficult / inconsistent, I would do this only in like solo and chamber context, because you can ask a lot more of fewer people than you can an entire like cello section, right? And then here's that last one, the 5th note, which you can get through a minor 3rd or perfect 19th. And then the 19th, which is somewhere. That's not right. So yeah, it's, as you can see, it's hard to kind of pick these notes out of the stratosphere, especially if there's no context leading up to it, if that makes sense. Now, artificial harmonics, which I think you're going to find you have a lot more control over. I think this is a much more useful thing for composers to be able to understand. Basically, what you're doing is you're fully depressing one note with your first finger and then lightly touching at a certain interval above that stopped note, right? So what's essentially happening is you're changing the fundamental. So all of those notes for like what intervals work to produce whatever pitches, all of those pitches change based on the note that you're depressing. So now in this instance, if you're depressing an A, there are certain intervals that you can still reach with your left hand in order to produce those harmonics. So obviously the first one doesn't work. Your hand can't reach an octave if you're like, it can't reach an octave up on one string, right? But intervals that do work are fifths if you're in higher positions, and maybe on violin that's more of a common thing. But perfect fifths, perfect fourths, and major and minor thirds work too. I would stick to fifths, fourths, and major thirds. So here's what all of those might look like. So again, the solid note at the bottom, that's the note that's stopped. So in this instance, that's going to be an A, which looks right there. And then the lightly touched note, which is a major third above. So here's the A. That's the C sharp. And then the resulting pitch is that parenthetical note up top. So you can hear it's a little bit out of tune. Again, the thirds are harder to do than the fourths and the fifths. So that's the major third. And then the fourth, the perfect fourth puts it 2 octaves up. The note is 2 octaves above the fundamental. That's the most common one and the easiest to do in my opinion, because it's the same hand shape as an octave across 2 strings, but it's just on 1 string. So it's a common shape is basically what I'm saying. And then the fifth, again, for viola and cello, so on the larger instruments, it's not super easy to do in first position. So because the natural hand position, the fourth finger goes to that D, right? And that's why the fourth is so common. But I can stretch, and that gets the note. If you want to give all your players tendinitis, have them do that for a while. As far as notation is concerned, basically what I have been doing throughout this video, except you wouldn't have the top notes. So basically the sounding pitches, you don't need those, but the pitches that you do need to notate are the note that's depressed, if it's an artificial harmonic, and then a diamond note head above that on the note that's lightly touched. So if you're doing a touch 4 harmonic, in that example that we just had, solid note head on the A, and then a diamond note head on the D above that. Don't notate them like this. You will see this in older scores, like early 20th century, and it just makes the whole thing a guessing game. But with this other notation with the diamond note heads, it's much more clear. Everybody knows what it means. Do that version. The notation for natural harmonics is kind of a different beast, though. So basically, you have this little circle symbol, right?
and then you can just have the single note head on wherever you're placing your finger, so you don't need to do any of the stuff with the diamonds. But what you need to do, if it's not an octave harmonic, so in other words, if it's not the harmonic that's produced by placing your finger an octave above the open string, then you should indicate with a Roman numeral what string the harmonic is supposed to be played on. So Roman numeral 4 is the lowest string on any 4-string instrument, and then 3 the second lowest, 2 third lowest, and the first 1 is the highest. So in this context right here, I have just the G with the circle, because it's just the octave above the G string, and every violinist will understand that that's what that means. I don't need to indicate Roman numeral 4. However, for the D, I do need to indicate Roman numeral 4 because that is an octave and a fifth. I don't know really why. It would depend on the context if I would need to be that specific about what string I wanted it on, because that is also an open string octave, so I could just as well be played an octave above the D string. And again, if there was no Roman numeral there, that's what it would happen by default. But if I wanted it really specifically to be on the G string, just put Roman numeral 4 over that. And then for the A and the following D, those are just octaves again, so you don't need the Roman numeral. And to kind of see that in action, I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit of a passage for you showing the mobility of these artificial harmonics and why I think they're more useful. You'll notice that between notes you're going to get a little bit of a portamento, like kind of an inherent slide, and that can be mitigated to a degree, but just know that that's kind of just part of it. So yeah, here is what that notation would look and sound like. Again, stuff like that, it's possible for an orchestra to, not just like solo and chamber like I was saying earlier, but yeah, an orchestra could definitely pull this off at the collegiate or higher level. I will say though that the faster you get with changing between notes with these artificial harmonics, it's going to become exponentially more challenging for the group to pull off. So err on the side of caution. Join the Is This Playable group on Facebook. And if there's anything you take away from this, I would say the Touch 4 harmonics are the most commonly used, the easiest to produce in my and many other players' opinions. Don't go too crazy and write something that's impossible. And also don't notate them the old style way. Do this new way. It's really clear and everybody gets it. And yeah, that's kind of the gist. But I hope you have fun exploring ways that you can use this in creative ways in your orchestration and your writing in general. It's a really cool technique and it should be taken more advantage of. As always, let me know if you have any questions down in the comments, and if you want to see more of this stuff, like and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. Yeah, thanks for watching.